Good morning. I'm Beth Horn, Executive Director of the Sands Point Preserve Conservancy, and I'm happy to welcome you to our very first online storytelling event. Thanks for joining us. The preserve is on the historic Guggenheim estate. You can see its beach along the Long Island Sound, a massive mansion called Hempstead House and its beautiful rose garden, and across the lawn, and a little to the left, Castle Gould. The estate is more than 100 years old and connects us with Long Island's Gold Coast history. More on that another time. We hold festivals and concerts, nature walks in the spring, summer, fall, and winter. But now that we are all staying home and the preserve is temporarily closed, we're connecting with our friends online like this. Our children's art, yoga, and science programs are all available online as well. So now we'll go inside Castle Gould to the Great Hall, where last year thousands of visitors of all ages explored an exhibition called May We All Grow Up to Be Children. It was based on a marvelous book, The Boy and the Boy King, which we are going to hear and see today. We're so fortunate to have the creators of this book with us, George H. Lewis, the author and illustrator, and his co-creator, A.D. Lubow. They'll tell us the story of Arthur and his imaginary friend Bun Bun, and their adventure to another time and place to befriend another 9-year-old boy, King Tut. They become great friends with much in common, and as the book's narrative says, they wage peace, not war. A Q&A follows the reading, so please send any questions you may have using the chat button at the bottom of your screens. And I want to also add that the book will be published this fall by American University in Cairo Press, just in advance of the 100th anniversary of the discovery of King Tut's tomb. And now I'm happy to welcome Arthur and George.
Beth, we are so pleased to tell this story from the Sands Point Preserve because it's a place that brings people closer to nature, the stars, music and art, wellness, horticulture, and more. With its forests and gardens and castles and playgrounds, it's a playground for peace and imagination.
Everyone at Sands Point Preserve has done a really wonderful job of giving the Conservancy such a very special soul. Our book is in many ways a kindred spirit. So let's begin.
To all of you tuning in from all over the world, welcome. You are real friends. Now we're going to read an abridged version of our story about an imaginary friend told against the backdrop of George Lewis's remarkable illustrations. So here we go. The Boy and the Boy King. Meet Arthur and his so-called imaginary friend Bun Bun. Bun Bun recently arrived from England. I dare say he's a bit pompous. If you ever call him an imaginary friend, you'll never hear the end of it.
Imaginary? I mean, really, the cheek of it. I'm as real as can be. Yes, I'm just a stuffed animal, and certainly, I admit it, I can be a little stuffy. But actually, I'm a wonderfully bright, terribly English, jolly clever bunny.
Bun Bun wasn't in a hurry, not by any stretch of the imagination. He'd often take time to summer at Bunny Kentport, where the rich and famous of the imaginary friends set like to holiday. He read a lot. Time Travel and Leisure was his favorite magazine. Arthur's mother was an archaeologist who studied Egypt. She'd joke, "Yes, Arthur, I'm an Egyptologist, and yes, I'm your mummy, but I like the way you call me Mum-Mum." When Arthur dreamed, he was a boy king. So much so that when he looked into the mirror, he sometimes saw the reflection of a king. Bun Bun encouraged this type of behavior.
Imagination rules. Remember, my boy, the magic of today is the science of tomorrow.
Arthur took Bun Bun everywhere. But by the time he was 9, his classmates began to tease and even bully him. So Bun Bun started to hide from plain sight.
Yes, it's true. Imaginary friends do spend a lot of time hidden away in book bags, which explains why I am really very well read.
Then Arthur's teacher, Miss Severe, threatened to take Bun Bun away and send Arthur for counseling, for letting his imagination get the best of him. "Why can't you go anywhere without this silly bonbon of yours?" Miss Severe would say. to which Bun Bun replied from a hiding place behind a tree.
Bonbon, how infuriating. I say, what kind of a teacher doesn't know the difference between a proper name and a pretentious piece of chocolate?
Fortunately, a gentler teacher, Miss Gutkind, came right over to counsel Arthur and Bun Bun, handing them a leather-bound volume entitled The Book of Magical Friends, which Arthur and Bun Bun read at bedtime. They pored over every line, studied every word, every single word. That night, staring into the stars, Bun Bun saw how worried Arthur was. Worried about losing his best friend and being forced to take all kinds of strange medicines to control what was diagnosed as an over-wondrous imagination. Bun Bun tried to deflect Arthur's worries.
They say our future is in our stars. But remember, my lad, our past is also in our stars. Life is just stardust, spiraling over time, stardust that has been swirling around on Earth for so long that it has forgotten from where it came. Did you ever wonder about that, Arthur?
Talk about wonder. That weekend, Arthur and Bun Bun found themselves wandering and wandering around the Temple of Dendur at the Metropolitan Museum when suddenly they were swept through the temple portal, caught up into a strangely mixed up cityscape. Flying through this astonishing vista, Bun Bun calmly assured Arthur,
We appear to be riding a moonbeam. There are deep, dark holes in the universe where the ancient and the new are one. This is such a place.
when Arthur and Bun Bun awoke, they found themselves in the driest place on earth. Gosh, totally parched. Arthur wished dearly for his mum.
The soul dreams dreams within a sea of dunes, but your spirit has to keep walking. Let's look for the source of energy in creation. Ra, let's go towards the sun. Let's find our own star.
Our two heroes next came upon a caravan of nomads settling in by a campfire at night, telling stories that sounded more like poetry.
Nighttime is the daytime of the desert, part of a universal creative intelligence. See that pyramid? It's pointing to a shooting star, flashing for a moment, as if the heavens had been made by humans, and the pyramids had been built by an intelligence from far beyond.
The nomad caravan headed to the city of Thebes for an audience with the boy king, King Tutankhamun, to plead for the building of a fishing dock for the people. But when they arrived at King Tut's court, the king's counselors advised the boy king to reject the dock. They said the site was reserved for military defenses only. The counselors were offering the boy king strange potions to sway his mind and soul and imagination. Bun Bun whispered to Arthur,
This scene looked all too familiar. Absolutely infuriating. A little bit of play and friendship and a lot of imagination is the only medicine Tut needs.
So the boys and Bun Bun went to the king's private chambers to play cards. Bun Bun blurted out,
Let's play.
Play? Kings aren't allowed to play.
Ah, but boys are. You're a boy king, so let's do it.
And so, in disguise, our heroes dashed down a long, statue-lined corridor into the courtyard. Bun Bun yelled with excitement.
Freedom, how exhilarating. What fun this is.
And oh, the fun a boy and a boy king can have, taking turns swinging over the banks of the Nile and sailing the great river. Almost oblivious to the spectacular views, the boys dragged up a right royal stinky bug collection onto the poop deck. Well, as Bun Bun observed,
Boys and boys kings will be boys.
by the time the sky began to twinkle, Tutankhamun was no longer a boy king, but simply a boy. Bun Bun, barely able to keep up, marveled at the splendor of imagination and the wonder of friendship.
How completely marvelous Arthur and Tut had come from totally different time zones, and they waged friendship, not war.
While Tut went off to hitch his ponies to the royal chariot quite independently, a white horse reared up from out of nowhere. "Look," said Arthur, "it's the horse from the Book of Magical Friends. It's us in the book, isn't it, Bun Bun?"
Yes, sir, it's been us all along.
Tut hitched 2 of his prized ponies to his favorite chariot and gave the reins to Arthur and Bun Bun, who gasped at the utter thrill of kicking up the sand and driving on their own. Soon Tut joined them, and Bun Bun bellowed.
The magic of childhood soars like a chariot in time and space.
He sang it out loud for no one but Arthur and the desert to hear. It was all beyond happiness. Then the boys, glancing up, saw a mirror image of the pyramids in the stars above.
As above, so below.
The chariot landed near the Great Sphinx of Giza. The Great Sphinx had been under a lot of pressure at work from some very bossy people to control floods and harvests and good times and bad. But when our heroes arrived and Bun Bun jumped up upon his paw, the Great Sphinx fell strangely at ease and fell like a puppy dog into a deep, deep sleep. Bun Bun couldn't help but boast.
The cosmos smiled as if it had a plan, as if imagination itself was one of the 7 wonders of the world. Yes, there will be an age when peace conquers war, an Aquarian age.
No sooner had Bun Bun mentioned Aquarius than water began to pour over the desert. Bun Bun declared,
The desert remembers its life at the bottom of the sea. The silicon in the sand remembers and will one day rule. The desert shall become the pharaoh. This is the desert remembering. This is the desert imagining. This is the cosmos veiled in mathematics and music. This is our childhood lasting forever.
Retreating to the safety of the roof of Tut's palace, our heroes looked in all directions. There, to the right, was the great Nile Valley with its verdant, fertile floodplains. But on the left, all you could see was fire and destruction, a place where people are enslaved, isolated, and unable to breathe, let alone evolve. Bun Bun beseeched the boy king.
You must fight for your kingdom now, for the sake of kingdoms come. As a boy and as a king, you must imagine. You simply must imagine something better and speak it loudly.
By this time, Arthur, missing his mom, wished to go home to New York, but Bun Bun, with special counsel from the labyrinth of the universe, decided that he would stay back with Tut in the hope of guiding him to a warless future, explaining,
In life, we're constantly torn between soul and soulmates by a labyrinth of cosmic choices. We're all passengers on a swirling ball in space, and somewhere within, I can be with you both, always. Deep into the distant galaxies is the pull of love that drives us here on Earth. You'll find me there, in the far-off stars where everything began and childhood never ends.
The boy and boy king said their farewells. The boy king Tut said,
Yes, I know now that love and light, above all else, shall rule. You and Bun Bun taught me what matters. Sailing and swinging and make-believe and fishing and card games and fast horses and chariots and even a stinky bug collection. I want to be a boy forever, and I want to show the world how wonder and imagination can work when left alone to play. Bun Bun, will you help me? Will you be my imagination? Will you be my guide? But most of all, will you be my friend? Somehow, I believe it's my destiny to help the world by living as a boy, and thus a king for all time.
And so the time came for Arthur to return to New York. Tears streaming, he worked his way down the hall of Osiris. Bun Bun tried to explain the journey through time as best he could.
If time has no beginning or end, and if starlight can evolve into thought, why can't thought spiral back and ahead into light? Yes, the past as well as the future is in our stars. Farewell, Arthur.
And that was that. Suddenly back at the Temple of Dendor, Arthur wanted to know only one thing. Mum, are men still at war? Arthur's mother thought this a strange thing to ask, but said, yes, my darling, I'm afraid so. Arthur found it hard to breathe for a moment, asking, Mum, what happened to King Tut? Was he able to bring peace to his people? Mum replied, oh, Arthur, sadly. Oh, Arthur, no, he was murdered when he was only a boy. Most historians suspect he was betrayed by his ministers. All but one, that is. A devoted, rather imaginative friend who remained behind the scenes, guiding him with light. Oh, Bun, grieved Arthur silently. Walking arm in arm, Arthur's mum went on. Oh, but Arthur, Tut did change the world in a way, entombed with his boyish things, his arsenal of wooden snake batons, as well as his bows and ivory boomerangs. Tut became a boy living as a boy forever, reminding us of the innocence and beauty of childhood. Arthur, Bun gave your soul that same gentle innocence and imagination, and with that, there's still time to create a peaceable world. Later that afternoon in his room, Arthur found a pictogram in his pocket. It was from Bun, and it read,
Dear Arthur, I trust that you are reading this from the safety of your home and that dear Mum is well. Arthur, you must know, I've tried to change history, and in at least one way, I'll have succeeded. The boy king will live forever, showing the world the purity of play he learnt from you. Tut's toys will have more value as art than gold. Remember, Arthur, imagination is never imaginary, it's real. The master starlight that evolved into human consciousness wonders not just where it came from, but where it's going.
The next day, Arthur found a brand new imaginary friend called Boo. They sat down at the piano and they did the most important thing they could do for the world. They played. When they rested, Arthur sat there just gazing for a while. Boo recoiled,
Are you just gonna keep staring at me, or shall we have a blast changing the world?
and that's our story.
Well, thank you so much, George and Arthur. It was, I thought, beautifully told, and thank you for doing this in this format, which is so unusual for everyone. If anyone would like to send a question, just use the chat button at the bottom of your screen. You'll have to roll your cursor down to the bottom of the screen for that option to come up. So feel free to send your questions. And in the meantime, I'm going to ask a couple of questions just to get us going. I wanted to ask you, why do Arthur and the boy king get along so well? What brings them together? And do you think that they'll remain friends after the book ends?
Well, I think they're together because they're both royal. They share the majesty and imagination of childhood. And I think as long as Arthur can stay a boy his whole life, they can remain friends.
I would also add to that, which is very true, that when children are allowed to play together, they really, most of the time, almost always find some beautiful way in which to play, especially when they're in nature. There's that sense of vibration that when we're in Gaia, when we're on the earth, I mean, I see it with my own two children. I see it in particular with my sister's children playing with pet pigs. There's a sense of children just come up with narratives and stories the entire time, and they feel more content and alive when they're experiencing that and sharing together.
Tell us more about the importance of play. It's such an important theme through the book. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
I think play is what a happy, joyful life is made of. And if you're clever, you'll make sure your work is your play.
And while we all have to stay at home, it's wonderful to take this journey with Arthur and Bun. Tell us the importance of imagination in our lives.
Well, it's interesting with imagination because I would say imagination is actually connected to our soul. I mean, there's no question about this book, as it does have a number of different layers to it. And one of the driving forces for me was always a sense of our imagination connects us to the cosmos. Our imagination allows us freedom and to experiment, to explore. So it's that sense of children feeling free, and I think their whole immune system is built. They're literally, their antibodies build positively when they are able to explore in a safe environment. So imagination in some ways is connected to the source, something cosmic, but at the same time, it's something very creative as well that all of us have. And of course, we start off as children, but we all become adults. And we mustn't lose that sense of curiosity, that sense of wonder. And I think when we can maintain that sense of wonder and curiosity about the world, we develop a reverence for it and a love of it. And as a result, we want to protect the world rather than harm it. So for me, there is a sort of sense of stewardship engaged, because most children really do love to be in balance with nature and they want to share the joy of it. And I think we need to protect that.
We absolutely need imagination to survive in this world as an individual and as a society. And of course, we all need friends. So I guess we need imaginary friends. By the way, we often ask audiences, like, who out there has imaginary friends?
You already saw
And
this.
about 75% of the audience raises their hand. And then we say, well, and now who has an imaginary friend but is ashamed to admit it? Maybe there's another 10%. So 85 or 90% of the population, you'll be glad to know, has imaginary friends. Nothing to be ashamed of.
That's wonderful. I think we may have some questions. Let's see. All right. So we'd love to know a little bit more about the process of collaborating on the book. How did you create and develop the story and the illustrations? Can you tell us a little bit about what came first, perhaps, whether it was text or illustrations or some combination?
Yeah, well, sometimes I would sort of specify a drawing, but more often than not, George would awake from a deep dream, and the illustration came to him, and he got it on paper, and then we wrote to the illustration as if to kind of interpret, like, what did the dream mean? And so in that sense, it was like music and lyrics, whichever comes first.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a fantastic creative process. And like with all creative processes, there is something magical and non-linear about it. I think that's the important thing to share is, you know, we're neighbors upstate. We both have little second homes up in the woods and in the Catskills. You know, it's very, very idyllic and close to nature there. And we'd sit on each other's porches and just share many ideas. I mean, it's funny how it originally started, because I had started to write down a few ideas and draw a few illustrations. And I was kind of, because my son is called Arthur and he has this bunny. Yeah. So it gave me great a sense of wanting to share something universal about this. But what was amazing for me is being able to sit with my friend Arthur Lubow, and of course the serendipity and the synchronicity of the fact that this man, who I then asked to co-create this story with, and of course we've been doing this now for 3 or 4 years. It's a rather remarkable journey that he's called Arthur as well. And so we really would just fire off ideas to each other. He would sometimes say, as we wrote the script, well, what about, for example, there was a time when my son would swing on the Scaleri River upstate on this big swing. And then Arthur said to me, what about doing that in ancient Egypt? And of course, then I just got this big download, and then there the pyramids was behind Arthur. I think we might be able to flip to it in a minute. It's a bit further on. Keep going. It's about 5 or 6 on from this, I think, over the river. There, that one. And you see, originally there was this swing we have upstate, which a friend of mine, a dear friend of mine, and Arthur's best friend, has this swing over one of the little creeks. And so that obviously fueled the imagination for something more magical for the book. But then other times, a lot of this stuff came through the dream world. And then Arthur and I would sit down and write to it, which was such fun. So, you know, it was a very organic and magical process.
And the reason this works is because of the very moral of the book, the timelessness of childhood. And so that these two boys from different time zones could be instant friends because nobody taught them to be enemies. And it's such an important moral for today. And that boyhood is essentially regal and timeless. And we should pay more attention to that and enjoy it.
And of course, it's symbolic for childhood. I mean, you know, just because it's a story about a boy, you know, we have to be very careful what political correctness does. It stops everyone in their tracks, because at the end of the day, you know, it's easier for me and Arthur to write from a boy's perspective because of this incarnation. We're both born male. But it's timelessness about the soul. You see, part of it isn't just about a material dimension, Beth, and all of you listening. It is some way of trying, it's a slight rebuke against the material dimension. I mean, as a spiritual teacher, as much as a student of the spiritual arts, I know we are souls incarnated in human form, and we're here to have a human experience, but we do come from the cosmos. We are not separated and divorced from the cosmos. And I think those of us who still feel disconnection from something much bigger are the ones who suffer much more in their mind, body, spirit sphere. And in this sense, this is a gentle way of saying, come on, guys, we're all in this together. We're all spiritual beings. And, you know, let's have some fun. We come to this planet to experience love at the end of the day. We come to this planet to experience love and to have multiple experiences. But we have to share in the joy of this world, protect it, yes, but also live authentically. And you know, work should be about you know, fulfilling that sense. It shouldn't be about a dread. It shouldn't be about something which we feel we have to do, but we don't like it. It should be about celebrating the very essence of humanity to co-create together. And I think this book allows us to look back at children and see what jewels they are, and maybe bring a little bit of that into our adult life.
Beautifully said, George. We have a question from Lisa that I actually think that what you just said may address this, but you may want to speak to this very specifically. Lisa writes, it seems like in this pandemic time, seems like everyone looks toward possibilities. Can you speak to the link between imagination and possibilities in this moment?
I mean, Arthur, would you like to start? I'm happy to start that one, but would you like to?
Go ahead, George.
In a time of seismic change, you see, I mean, I give a lot of workshops on this. This is sort of my real go-to here. I think in a time of seismic shifting change, we're changing eras. I mean, if you want to look at it through the Plato Great Year, which is the precession of the equinoxes, we're coming out of the age of Pisces. And don't forget, Pisces is the fish. It was the early symbol of Christianity. And we're moving into the age of Aquarius. Now, to a lot of people, that doesn't mean very much, but we are moving very quickly now into a whole new reality. Now, the pandemic, for how tragic it is a boon, because it's allowing us to go deep in a way that we weren't able to before. We were all too busy running on the protocols of the previous paradigm, meaning getting up in the morning, bit like a robot, going to work, survival. And now we've all been forced at home. This is the largest leisure event in the history of modern humanity. You know, really. And we are all, most of us anyway, are going down the rabbit hole, trying to learn more about really what is it to be human. And this lovely connection that we have now digitally is going to also feed us into this new reality. And I think the imagination is what allows us to create the future. You see, what we think now and what we do creates a different timeline. If we pull away from fear and stay as a community about creating something sacred, beautiful, soulful, and we've got to get spiritual here. We can't leave that elephant in the room just on its side. You know, we actually integrate a spiritual dimension to our lives, then we can create a possibility which is going to be much more aligned to what our children need and what we need, because we're all children as well. Of course, we have responsibilities, but the child in us, the Latins called it the puer, the eternal child, Peter Pan. It doesn't mean that we become naive and we do stupid things. It means we keep that candle open to the sacredness of humanity that is represented by the child. And, I'm happy to go into more detail on this at another time. But I think imagination plays a very key part to the pandemic and to the future and to stepping away from fear and keeping grounded through a meditational practice as well, a form of prayer, but also a sense of belief that we're actually moving in the right dimension, into the right situation, the right trajectory towards a new dimension, a new reality.
On the subject of how do you find answers for the future and move ahead in difficult times, just a quick story. So Albert Einstein once gave his students at Oxford the very same exam as the previous term. His assistant asked, how and why could you give them the same questions? And Einstein replied, it's simple, because the answers have changed. So our message is look for new answers, lest we repeat the same old mistakes.
Hear, hear. Beautifully said.
Very beautifully said. Let's look at the artwork itself again. The illustrations depict an ancient world, but also a global, timeless setting. How did you create this context? Tell us more about how you created the environment, visual environment for the story.
I mean, I think that it's a great question, and quite honestly, I could talk for hours on that because it's simple and it's complex. It's very paradoxical. So on one sense, I'm going to be linear initially. I've spent a lot of time in the Middle East. I spent a lot of time away from England, and obviously home is now America, New York, in what I would call either exotic or unfamiliar, unusual places. I call them very magical and mysterious and beautiful places. But that definitely fed my subconscious. I mean, there is something remarkable about the desert. I mean, you do see stars on the horizon. I mean, it is the one we're looking at now. Truly, I mean, I have photographs of the desert very similar to that. So from a linear perspective, I've definitely been influenced by my own experience in this incarnation. But now let's jump to magic. And this is where, the journey with Arthur has been so special because both of us are total dreamers. We come from very different backgrounds in a way, experiences, but there's something in us, the child in us, that really does want to believe in this cosmic connection. And I think there's been so much harshness in our civilization. The masculine principle has been so dominant. You see it in our architecture, you see it in our educational system, you see it in our medical profession. The sense of, I'm going to solve everything linearly and rationally, which has a great, great purpose. But there is something feminine. And the great irony is that Arthur and I are both men in this life. But as far as the underlying magical process here, I think there's a sense of us wanting to journey into the sacred feminine, into the negative principle, as Alan Watts would have called it, which is space, time travel. What does that mean symbolically? I'm not a physicist, but at the end of the day, we are uncovering things which we really didn't know before. This is a new Copernican revolution. I do know that's just intuitively, and stuff is going to emerge in the coming decades, which is going to blow our minds. That's exciting. And to be able to share some of those very little insights as a human being, which Arthur and I are, through a magical book, pictorial book, is just utter eudaimonia, utter pleasure.
People have asked us, well, we're both Aries. How could we be such collaborators when we're so competitive in Aries? And the answer is,
speak for yourself.
We're the best damn collaborators that anybody ever experienced. That's just a joke.
It's beautiful because Aries is always about self-sovereignty, and we'd always be pushing ourselves ahead. So how can we make this better? I mean, this book has been in evolution really right up until now. And of course, just the fact we found a publisher means it has to stop because it goes to publication. But we were tweaking it the whole time, and that's the journey of life. I mean, in some ways, it's a mirror on all of us. It did not start this way. If I were to show you some of my early illustrations, I hadn't got into a rhythm. They were conceptually interesting, but they were rather dull looking. And then the text to begin with was quite mechanical. I remember Jane Curley, who's a dear friend and mentor of us both, and she's very well known in the children's book world. She said, because she adores us, she said, George, you're onto something, but you've got a long way to go. And she was right, and I think there's that sense of, that's the life that we have as spiritual beings. As Socrates says, we start as the brute and some of us move upwards. There is the journey as a spiritual soul on planet Earth, is to journey and to live the experience and to savor it. And of course, it's our children that make all of us, the ones, apart from the very, very odd, cruel humans who've gone away from that, the vast majority of us human beings, we see the light in our children. We see, even if we don't have children, we see it in little Johnny. It doesn't matter whether you physically have children or self. I happen to, Arthur happens to, but many of my friends don't. But they see the light, the candle that is held, and we must nourish that and protect it. And this is a sort of a nod to our children and our children in ourselves to protect that jewel, because that's what it is to be human, is to love.
I think George really gives us all permission to savor the mystery of life. I mean, when you think about it, that we all have evolved from stardust that evolved so long that it can think and wonder where it came from. That's pretty mysterious, and George gives us permission to think more deeply about that.
Much astrophysics today, real cutting edge science and real cutting edge physics is deeply spiritual and philosophical. I'm getting much more into adult talk now. I don't know how many children are watching this, but if you were to read Richard Tarnas's book, Cosmos and Psyche, it's one of the greatest books written about, really, we're coming out of this materialistic, I'm talking philosophically here, perspective of the world where we are here in isolation, we're here by chance, and we're not connected. And that's why we're so diseased. Where this new enlightenment, and it's not just a rational enlightenment, it's a spiritual enlightenment, it's an integrative enlightenment between mind, body, and soul. So we use the brain to service the intuition, and there's a sense of beauty and wonder in the world, which is, I know this is the trajectory that we as a species are going, and I thank you, Beth, very much for giving us our first opportunity to share it through this book format.
Well, we were very happy to do that because we've actually been involved in some ways, marginally, in sharing this book and in some of its journey. But I do want to say that there is such a value in the experience of holding the printed book. I do encourage people to get hold of that, either through Amazon or through American Press in Cairo when it's available next fall, because that's not just a plug. It's actually because I'm an old-fashioned believer in holding a book and being able to touch the pages and turn them and to see these works of art printed in, I imagine, George, the way that you really envision them. There's a great value to that experience. So I hope you all will pursue that. I have noticed that one of our young artists watching has added a few red lines to the screen, and I think that's marvelous, because why should this not be fully interactive? But in case you were wondering about the red swaths across some of the screens that you're seeing, we thank the artists for contributing those. But I think that really we see this rich depth in the messages of this story. It's an adventure on so many levels, and I think that it's something that anyone of any age can really delve into it and spend time and experience it. And so I'm so appreciative of George and Arthur for sharing this with us, because this is a bit of an experiment. We spend all of our time at the preserve. If there's one single thing we do, it's about bringing people out and to connect with nature, to come away from screens and phones and everything else, and to interact with the real world in a physical place that's as beautiful as the preserve is, and they're anywhere else, of course. But now we don't have too many options to connect. And so we're so grateful to have a chance to gather with all of you to look at this beautiful work, the story, the illustrations. It's a lovely experience to share this with all of you. So I want to thank everyone very much for being with us. If there aren't any more questions, I think that perhaps we'll sign off. We've recorded this and hope that we will have this available on the Conservancy's YouTube channel. And so unless are there any other last questions that anyone would like to send?
Oh.
All right, I think we're
There is theboyandtheboyking.com, and you can click on the Amazon pre-order button if you wish.
Yeah, beautiful.
very good. All right, well, thank you everyone. And I hope everyone stays healthy, stay home, stay safe.
Great.
Be well, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
you. Thank you.
Amazing.
Thank you very
Thank you for
much.
joining us.
Beautiful.